With over 15,000 tools available, selecting the right MarTech can be challenging. Meet the MarTech Intelligence Report's free buyer's guides, exploring specific platforms including purchase considerations, leading players, adoption trends, and more. No matter where you are in the purchase journey, MarTech Intelligence Reports can help.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to What AI and Agents Mean for Marketing Teams Now and in the Future. I'm Greg Kilstrom, Principal at the Agile brand, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's discussion. Marketing teams are on the cusp of a major transformation, with new roles like agent designers and AI operations managers to shifts in workflows and leadership models. We're entering an era where humans and AI agents collaborate as colleagues of a sort. We're going to take a look at what the future of work looks like when agent-powered organizations become the norm. I'm excited to be joined by Joshi Zhu, Head of Analytics at Google, Noah Dinkin, Founder and CEO of Stencil, and Robin Ross, Digital Analytics and Loyalty Executive with Activate Insight. And just a reminder, if you have questions or comments during the session, please drop them in the chat, and we're going to do our best to bring them into the conversation. So before we dive in and get started with our discussion, I'd like to start with a poll for everybody watching today. If you could launch the first poll. Please enter your first name and click on the Join Audience button. Then click on the polls icon in the top right corner of the video window. You're going to see the poll come up and select one option. And we're going to wait about 20 seconds or so to give everyone a chance to respond. And let me just go over that one more time just in case. You'll be asked to join the audience to participate. Then you're going to enter your first name and click on the Join Audience button. Then click on the polls icon in the top right corner of the video window. Then you're going to see the poll come up in the right side of the panel of the video window and select one option. So let's give it maybe a few more seconds here. All right, why don't we bring up the results? All right, so where are you at in your company's agentic journey? It looks like a few of you are pretty far along, but we've got a lot of people that are either not started yet or implementing a few use cases. Okay, great. So this is going to help us as we talk through as well, just to make sure we're making our answers relevant. So let's start our discussion here today by talking about the impact of AI agents to the work of marketers. And so I always think it's important to start with a little level setting and let's set the vocabulary here. So Noah, why don't we start with you? For the purpose of this discussion, how are we defining agents?
Yeah, thanks, Greg, and thanks for having us here today. Exciting discussion ahead. I know this can get confusing because there's a few different things that might fall under the umbrella of agentic system. But in terms of the question you specifically asked of what actually or specifically is an agent, agents are AI systems that, in the simplest form, are autonomous to some degree, right? And so that means if something is going through some sort of a predefined path, whether that's code that's orchestrating something, even if there's choices along the way, that's generally a workflow, not an agent, right? Agents are dynamic. They can adapt to context. They can use tools. They can break down a complex goal into smaller steps or use reasoning to figure out the right thing on actions and figuring out and adapting the plan that it goes. That's an agent, right? And so there's a lot of folks out there who probably unintentionally are calling things that aren't technically an agent, at least as the folks on the frontier here define them.
Yeah, thanks for that. So with that definition, to guide our discussion here. How will the introduction of AI agents change the division of labor within a marketing team, and which traditional roles do you foresee becoming either obsolete or at least significantly redefined? Robin, how about if we start with you?
Also, thanks, Greg, for having us here. This is going to be an interesting discussion, really based on the poll results. I'm surprised at how many people are as far ahead as they are. But as I think about where this space is going, and this occurred to me last week when I was at the Adobe Max conference, is that there is what we're trying to do is shorten the space between the creative and the consumer. And if we think of all the layers that are in between and what it takes to put any type of a creative and execution, a measurement into place, agentic is going to help us accelerate those, remove some of those steps, and really put us in a position to execute quicker, measure quicker. But I think what is going to be a big part of this is that there isn't, the human is more relevant than ever. Just because if we cannot understand what the impact is to the business, and we cannot understand what we're going to market with. The robots are not taking over. Somebody still needs to have the domain expertise to really lead and guide, and put a strategic uh, implementation in place.
Joshi, do you have some thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, I think since we hit on measurement, I think one aspect of marketing that's going to stay very relevant in this case is making further decisions on investments, and also ensuring that we don't look at different marketing events as in isolation. And that is where I would say there will be a different way of interacting between those agents and the humans. So the agents, for example, will be able to help us get access to more data and potentially crunch more data with more accuracy. But at the same time, at the end of the day, we will have to use that data to make judgment calls as for, do we invest more of our budget? Do we decrease our budget? And that is something that only, I would say, the human marketer is able to connect the dots and then also build that level of trust with the decision makers to drive that forward.
And so then beyond, there's certainly a lot of technology and technical proficiency involved here, but beyond that, what maybe ethical or creative challenges do you anticipate when integrating AI agents into collaborative marketing projects? Noah, why don't we start with you?
Sure. In our world at Stencil, we have these discussions a lot as people are trying to think through how will things be in the future, or how could they be in the future. And so if you think about brand or brand guardrails, brand governance in the context of AI and generative AI, in a lot of cases, and what we see maybe the first step or foot in the water from brands and large companies is AI and Gen AI is creating that first draft of something for humans to review, right? And the inputs to that first draft might be a few sentences in a brief, might be a massive brief. It could be a whole bunch of data. It depends on the level of sophistication and pipelines that are there. But generally, people want to feed it more context and more helpful things, helpful signal for the AI to work more effectively, right? Again, what that's doing is producing a first draft that then goes to a human to review. And so it ends up in this really interesting place where you have extreme intelligence parsing more inputs than any human generally could, creating something that then you're asking a human to opine on, right? And in a bunch of cases, and it's probably tough to prove in the moment, the human may want to make suggestions that actually lessen the performance of whatever that thing is. And of course, there's a whole bunch of inputs and variables that could come into play there. Or there could be a whole bunch of subjectivity, right? Because brand is a really interesting concept of what is a brand, what does it mean? What do we want to uphold for our brand if we're a large company that's been around for 100 years? And how do you balance that against performance, especially when the level of intelligence here driving that creative is far greater than anything in history. And so at the end of the day, what we're seeing is that AI is intensifying the need for really, really strong governance and that governance being the safety net that's going to protect brands and give them enough reassurance and comfort to allow these workflows to transform step by step into the future.
Yeah, and that governance is key, not only from the creative aspect and the brand aspect, but also, Robin, how about if you talk a little bit about, what are some of the ethical challenges and components of that?
I think of any company who is dealing in consumer data or really dealing in kind of protection of some IP needs to be really thoughtful about the use of these tools. Just because I think the thing that is very uh, inviting about AI is its ease of use, but I think what we need to be careful of is we don't. It's still a bit of a black box to us, right? So in terms of what happens when it goes in, what happens when it goes out, if you aren't able to really understand the custody of that exchange of information and understand how that data is being used or ingested someplace else, I think you're doing a disservice to your customer base. And I think it's just when Noah talks about governance, I think it's those kind of things where a company's got to go in very open minded. It's not a small decision to put data into a platform, and if you cannot speak to how that data is being used, regardless of the impact of the business, I think you're taking a risk. And I think that's where you need to partner with your privacy teams, your IT teams, and your business teams to really understand what's your best go to market, because the allure of this is the productivity gains, but you have to have all the information where you go in. So as frustrated as we can kind of get because we want to move fast, sometimes we also need to be responsible in the space, and we need to understand what is going to happen with that data, because at the end of the day, when Noah talks about brand, our brand is our reputation, and we don't want to risk our reputation.
Yeah, yeah. And as evidenced by the poll that we flashed up at the beginning of the session, we do have a lot of leaders and a lot of people out there in the audience that are taking, let's say first, if not early steps in some of these directions. So I wonder if we could talk about, what are some of the steps that you'd recommend a marketing leader take to begin preparing their department for a shift towards some of these agent integrated workflows that we're discussing here. Noah, why don't we start with you?
Sure. And it's a similar question as people have thought about, where could AI in general, whether it's agents or otherwise, come into play. This may seem really, really simple, but the first thing that we see many companies lack is an actual map or understanding of what their workflow truly is. Right? There's a general, very high level directional thing, and in some cases, it's a little lower altitude, but almost nobody has an actual detailed map of like how something goes from beginning to end, who's involved, what tools are there, what people are there, what the workflows are, right? What happens if something gets approved at this step? What happens if it gets rejected at the step? And so we created a framework called SPEED, SPEED, right? That's a tool that marketing leaders use and marketing teams to do exactly that and optimize their workflows and figure out where agents or AI can best fit. And so we define it. The S is, scan the process. You got to map exactly what the process is. The P is you got to pinpoint the bottlenecks and looking at those questions. Um, e being think about the economic impact for each of those places, right? Humans have costs, external humans have costs, whether those are agencies or consultants, tools, right? Time and process. Think about opportunities based on that of where things could be. And right, you can rate those red, yellow, green. And then based on that, define the guardrails. That's the D, right, of the governance, so that even if you speed up one part of it, it's just gonna run into a bottleneck in the next part, right? If you're not ready there, and so you need to figure out like it's a business decision ultimately, right? We think about brand or otherwise. Where are we going to put the guardrails? How are we going to do it? Right? How are we going to use technology to do that? Because as you speed up one part of the process, you're generally not looking at a situation where you can just throw lots of other humans at the next part of the process to make up for that.
Right. Yeah, I'm always surprised at how even organizations spend a lot of time mapping the customer journey, which is very important, but they leave out what you just described, which is, okay, how are we actually going to deliver that? And I think, with agentic, it's definitely needed. Joshi, what are your thoughts on some first steps that a marketing leader could take?
Yeah, I think just responding to the survey question that we had earlier, I think a lot of the organizations are just starting with some pilots, and some of the organizations haven't even started. What I would maybe think about is making sure that we are not implementing the AI agents in isolation, because one of the things that I'm seeing is that many departments are doing that. Not just in marketing, but also sales teams are also implementing agents to serve customers, customer support, obviously, as well. And it's very important not to look at all of these agents in isolation, because all of them, they touch the customer in some shape or form. So we need to make sure that the data, the experience, and the engagement is consistent throughout. And therefore, it's very important for the marketing leader in this case to really collaborate with this cross-functional partners who also touch the customer to deliver a holistic and consistent experience. Well, they may still translate into different agents, given that they're at the different stages of the customer journey, but it's also very important for the underlying data and the underlying engagement model to be consistent across.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think, Greg, maybe just building upon what Joshi said, that whole idea of just because you've added agents to the mix, that just makes things faster, so you can create problems quicker sometimes in doing this. And I think it's just really thinking through, regardless of agent or human, customer and consumer experience needs to be at the forefront, and that is going to be your outcome. And if we're not considering that, and if we're building in silos, as Josh suggested, we're solving our own problems, which could be creating downstream problems that we haven't even considered yet, even though we feel better about what we delivered.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think this kind of brings up a topic of just the skills that managers and leaders are going to need to have. I mean, certainly some of them are going to be consistent with what they've already been doing, but AI agents, it's another thing to manage. It's a different way of thinking about these things. Joshi, kind of building on what you were sharing earlier, what's maybe the most critical skill that a manager will need to design and supervise an AI agent almost as a team member?
Yeah, I think the first thing to really think through is thinking about how workflows and collaboration may or may not need to evolve. Going back to our first question, which is we talked about the R and R's between the human and the machine. In which case, managers and leaders of divisions in this case, they'll have to think through, what are some of the things that I want to see systematically come from the AI agents versus our human team members. And based on that, do I need to maybe rethink how I design the jobs in terms of its day-to-day roles and responsibilities? And that will have implications on the specific types of skills or talent that I'm hoping to cultivate, train, and hire for the team. So specifically, I think some of the things that are going to be amplified from a human standpoint, as I mentioned, decision making, whether the that the agent is able to help us generate, and at the same time also being able to build the trust. To one of the points earlier, agents are still to some extent black boxes, and we really need to make sure that we're able to build the trust with both decision makers and also our customers at the same time. So, in which case, the human or team member is crucial in bridging that gap. And all of that, from a team manager standpoint, translates into the specific skills that he or she will have to pivot to when cultivating their team.
Yeah. Robin, what are your thoughts about skills needed for marketing managers?
I think of this from a little bit less of a technical point of view, and I wish I had a punchy acronym like Noah had to put in. But number one to me is domain expertise is more important than ever. So you can't neglect having domain expertise in your business, and you can't make up for that. Number two is critical thinking. I think this is where you really need to put AI to the test because based on your domain expertise and putting that together with critical thinking, that's going to give you your competitive advantage in the space. Otherwise, AI is just a commodity. Everybody has access to the tools. The tools are very affordable. So if you don't have domain expertise and critical thinking, I think you're just another can of soup on the shelf. And then the third piece to me is, and as I kind of think about how we would hire people in the future, is judgment, right? Like you need to really push, have good judgment. And judgment isn't just the ethical side, but judgment based on your expertise. So something was interesting last week in at a conference where they were showing how an AI tool could design something and how fast it was, and the designer at first was going, that is really cool. But and then I said, you know what's different is you know what good is, right? You are the training data to know what good is, and that nobody can just start that job and figure that out. So that's where that whole idea of domain expertise, critical thinking, and judgment really will be your moats that you really need to build in the use of these tools.
Yeah, and I really like that because it also, I mean, it underscores the fundamentals of the role, but it also kind of elevates the human's role in all of this as well. And Robin, maybe as a follow on to that, because there is a lot of focus on how much can we hand off to AI to do for us. What's the risk of handing off too much?
The risks are mighty, right? The risks are great, and I think that the attractiveness of AI is it can do a lot of work, and I think that impresses the CFOs and the people really managing expenses for the company. But at what cost sometimes is what you really need to think about. I think when you're thinking of the roles, and this really goes back to what Noah said, if you haven't documented your process, you're in danger because that process, knowing in going through that process and understanding what AI can do and then making an intentional decision of what AI shouldn't do, that's going to be critical to protecting your business and protecting your consumer. So I really love that idea of the speed, and that I'm going to steal that from Noah because as I'm thinking through work processes here, they're check boxes as you're going through. And I love the idea of identifying anything that is, I look at it this way, that it's low value, but high effort, that it's immediately something that should go to AI because I just need an outcome out of doing that. And stealing from Rory Vaden, that idea, do you have anything that can be automated, delegated, or eliminated? That should be on your AI to-do list.
Yeah, yeah, love it. And so, as marketers, we certainly have our marketing KPIs and marketing goals and measures of success. But how do we measure ROI and success of an AI agent within a marketing team? And what metrics should leaders be prioritizing here? Particularly, again, we've got a lot of people that are taking some first steps here. Noah, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I think this is perhaps a bit hidden, but this is actually one of the toughest things that marketing leaders face um, because uh, the, a seemingly easy answer is effectively handed to them or given with a context of, hey, we expect costs to go down, right? And different organizations might think about that just as tooling costs or external agency or consultancy costs. Other organizations look at it holistically in terms of headcount internally or things like that. And that's certainly one possible option. But leaving the frame there, I think, misses a big, uh, better business question, right? Which is what's our cost per outcome? right? And phrasing it that way, like very few marketing leaders actually understand that or could answer that question, right? And so different businesses, B2B, B2C, whatever it might be, have outcomes that mean different things, right? You can measure it all the way to a transaction or a sale. It could be a lead. It could be an opportunity created or pipeline. It could be a partnership or a biz dev deal, right? But like, what is that thing we're trying to drive, and what does it cost us holistically to make one of those happen, or make 100 of them, or 1,000 or a million, whatever the scale is, right? And then work backwards from there, because maybe your costs actually don't go down, but if you can pay the same and get 50% more outcomes, I guarantee you your senior leadership will be very, very happy, right? Like probably happier than getting the same output with reducing the cost, right? Because organizations generally valued on how much they're growing. And so I really would encourage marketing leaders to take a step back and not just take the quick, easy, handed to them frame of only costs going down, but really think of like what could be possible, what's the outcome we're trying to drive, and then architect the bridge between those two.
Yeah, that's great. Joshy, how about you?
Yeah, I think one common pitfall that I see when companies deploy agents or AI pilots is they typically stop at some intermediate metrics. So one example is some companies anchor a lot on number of users of this AI agent or number of visits to this specific tool that we have, which is great. I mean, it's important that these tools have a high level of engagement to unlock real business value. But engagement is just a means to an end. It's not the end. So it's important for companies to really tie the AI agents to specific organizational North Stars, be it revenue, cost, customer experience, anything that the company or the broader organization is hoping to optimize for. I know that might be harder to measure than some of the things like engagement, and that's where I believe it's first of all it does require in-depth analysis on how this AI agent will specifically translate into those North Stars, and that actually sets a much higher bar for potential investments into AI agents, which is in and of itself a great filter to filter out projects that may look good on paper but may not necessarily move the needle. And additionally, I think some of the folks mentioned that they're piloting, which is a great idea. As you're setting up the pilot, it's also important to think about how you may or may not want to introduce, different attribution studies to really pinpoint how the North Stars are moving based on those pilots. I think that a lot of the marketers are very familiar with the A/B testing concept when it looks at advertising performance. I think that is something that organizations can also borrow to measure the impact of AI agents internally as well.
Yeah. Love it.
Greg, can I add on to both what Noah and Josh said there? Because I think, again, if you're looking at what could be a key differentiator to you in your company, and I don't think we can ignore the major announcements of layoffs from big companies, and the culprit is always AI. This is where I think uh, progressive thinking companies would be thinking about how do I reinvest those savings to really build market share. Because I think the easy, and this is a little bit flippant to say, the easy decision is to cut costs. I have no idea what their economics are that kind of lead to that. But I'm hopeful that as we're becoming more efficient, we're really human focused to figure out how we can really set people up for success, to really use their best skills. The reason that we brought them in wasn't to move a paper from here to here, it was to really unlock, and how we can partner with AI as a strategic thought partner to really get into that idea of doing more. That's where the opportunity exists. And I get a little worried sometimes when I see these big announcements, and I understand the fear people have, just in terms of they think AI is going to replace them, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're gonna do a few minutes of Q&A here, but before we do, and actually to do that, you can put your questions in the chat. So if you want to start adding them now, I welcome you to do that. Before we jump into questions, though, one last question for everybody here, and a good takeaway for the audience. What's your biggest takeaway for marketers here today? And Robin, why don't we start with you?
Biggest takeaway. Well, again, I'm going to steal from Noah. So speed is my big takeaway that I'm going to add right away. But I think in understanding the opportunity, knowing where everybody is in the space, it's now the time to really be thinking about what to do next. And you don't have to move so fast, right? The but you do have to move. So just be careful, be intentional, find the right partners and tools, but be in a space that you're moving and learning, because the pace of change right now is the slowest it's ever going to be, which is something that I didn't think about till last week. Like, it is only going to speed up from here. So you better merge soon, even though if you start slow, keep moving now.
Yeah, yeah. Joshie, how about you?
Yeah, I would say definitely experiment, but do not experiment in isolation. Make sure that you're providing a consistent touch point experience for the end users, be it internal or external, and ensuring that we are collaborating across the four walls of the department, and the AI agents are there to break down the silos, not to reinforce them.
Noah, how about you?
Still trying to figure out how I feel about being stolen from in broad daylight like this. Um, just repeatedly.
Honored.
Yeah, right, exactly. Great artist steal, or whatever the thing is. I just borrowed that and butchered it, but I, I think it's now, if marketing leaders and teams haven't already, like, to me, there's no excuse for understanding the workflows of your team, right? Because any discussion internally is a waste of time unless you actually understand like what's going on today. Even if you end up ripping up the whole thing, you can have an informed discussion rather than a whole bunch of people getting excited about the shiny thing, or, oh, we could do this over here, or whatever. Like, you can actually have a real discussion and sort of lay out the paper, if you will, on the desk, and talk about it, having a shared common understanding there. And so with that, um, I strongly encourage teams and leaders to think about what where where are bottlenecks going to occur as you accelerate one part of the process, or you dramatically increase one piece of that process, and whether you want to call those governance or guardrails or things like that that need to come into place, or change the form where they exist or how they are. um, those are things that, even if teams and executives get really excited about bringing AI into part of a workflow, the that comes to a grinding halt when there is a problem. And we're going to see more of these things. And even if it's not your company, your competitor having a problem, I guarantee you is going to cause 20 meetings at your company about how do you avoid that exact same thing happening. And so the more you can be thinking ahead, and teams think ahead of how are we going to control for that? What does that look like? Here's what that means. I think the better discussions you're going to have, and ultimately the more successful you're going to be at bringing AI and agents into your workflow and into your organization.
Great. Well, yeah. So let's we're gonna take a few questions from the audience here. And again, reminder: if you have a question, pop it in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to as many as we can. So I'll take one here, and I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit, but the question is, we talked a little bit about what leaders should be thinking about, but what should leaders be doing to um, help develop their current managers to essentially ma- manage and lead hybrid teams, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about humans and humans working alongside agents. What should leaders be prioritizing when they're developing their managers to be able to lead in this kind of environment?
I'll jump in, Greg. So I think the fundamentals are not different. Like, management is management, and we got to start with the outcome in mind. But I do think what is going to be different is making sure that our management as well as our frontline teams have AI fluency. right? Like this is a new skill set that needs to be prepared for coming up, that if you want to differentiate yourself and really prepare yourself for what's next, you need a basic level of AI fluency. This is the new calculator, right? So we had debates for the longest time that should we use calculators or not? Should we use the internet or not? This is a utility, right? So be prepared in terms of what is it going to take to map that skill, because it is accessible, which is exciting. This is a skill that you can pick up, but no, it's a skill, right? That this is AI can take you in multiple directions. So having that fluency will better prepare you as a company, better prepare you as a team, and better prepare you as a leader.
Another question, I know we talked about measuring overall ROI, but another question is based around what's the anticipated ROI timeline? So again, we've got a lot of people in the audience here that are either about to start, thinking about starting, or in early stages. What's realistic? Obviously, we want instant ROI, but what's realistic to expect when you're shifting marketing spend into AI agent operations?
I can chime in there. So I would say, yes, I think it's important to understand that the ROI is not going to come right after you deploy the solution, especially since once the AI agents are deployed, there will be a time for adjustments, for people to get used to the new workflow, for all of the stakeholders and users to get educated, and to some of the cases, for the managers actually to step in and role model how things should be working as intended. So do not expect instant results, but definitely make sure that there is I would say what's important is make sure that there is a good cadence for the team to go back and report and measure on the specific performance metrics that the team cares about. And those metrics, as I mentioned earlier, should tie to the North Stars of the organization. So one thing that I would encourage is maybe have a monthly or quarterly review on where we're progressing in terms of our AI adoption, and is that really unlocking what we're hoping to see. And let's see if, look at the leading indicators, first of all. As I mentioned, engagement, while it's not a final metric that we should be optimizing for, is a good leading indicator. And there are other leading indicators as we are setting up these pilots, for example. So that's one way. The other way that I would specifically mention is also ensure that the decision making cycle is aligned with sort of the time horizon that we expect to realize value. Let's say, some companies run on an annual cycle in terms of planning, and the AI agent launches just before the annual cycle opens. That may not be a good time for us to revisit how we want to reinvest, but maybe a year down the line, it will be a great idea to revisit that to see if we are getting some of the traction that we're expecting.
Yeah. Well, just to jump in, one other way, and I think Sashi has a couple really, really good points there, is to go at it backwards. And this again is like one of the E's in the speed framework. But if you know what the workflow is and you sort of think about like what's the economic impact for impacting like this part of the workflow, whether that's cost reduction or we could get better performance, right? If we could do 20 or 200,000 versions as opposed to 2 or whatever that is, you at least know the size of the pie you're going after. And you can have a business discussion, probably because you're asking about ROI, you need to manage up to the right stakeholders or across to say, like, is this worth going after? Right? Like there's a huge cost that lots of people don't think about, which is like you or your team's time to actually do the change management, try it out, learn, and those kinds of things. And so if you do that to save $12, it's not going to be worth it, right? If you do it to save $12 million, if that's the size of the pie, different story, right? And there's a whole spectrum there, and it can go much larger. And so that's where I think, a different view on the ROI question is figuring out what's the right pie to go after, because then you can also say, okay, this is only worth this much investment in order to try and get at that opportunity.
Just a quick build on that, Greg, is I would I would frame it a little bit differently, where the business model has not changed, right? You're exactly what Joshua was saying is that your outcomes are the same, and instead of having an AI adoption strategy, really you should look at your business model and see where AI fits in. So I would just frame it exactly a little bit reverse, and that an adoption will take care of itself when you see a solution that is going to add value to the business.
Yeah, that's great. Well, that's all the time we have today. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you to our panelists. Don't forget to please take a moment to rate this session as well. And now here's Mike Pastor to wrap things up.
Thanks, Greg. So that's a wrap on what we hope was a day of insightful discussion about AI and agents. All of today's MarTech sessions are going to be available on demand until May 3rd, 2026. You can access them on the main agenda or your MarTech page. The MarTech Conference returns March 4th, 2026. We're going to be exploring how to reach customers in today's uncharted territory. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you back here in March and online at martech.org in the meantime.